Hello everyone, welcome to another live Voices. How many times have I done this? Another Voice Essentials live hangout. It is good to have you all joining in with today's live hangout, and we've got a very special guest with us today, who I will introduce to you very soon. Really interesting topic today, and it's my hope that it's not only going to benefit those of us who are of the female biology, but also I'm really looking forward to today's subject because not only as a singing teacher, but as a fellow human being of my female counterparts, I want to learn more about the impact of things like hormones and menopause and these things that really do have a significant impact on the voice for many women. So we're gonna deep dive into that today. It's going to be, I think we'll have a bit of fun with it as well. I think it's going to be not only interesting topic, we're going to learn something, but I think we will be able to keep it light and probably throughout the discussion we're going to see Daniel turn red a few times, so that might be interesting as well. Hey, I want to let you know next week, very quickly before I introduce our wonderful guest, next week, I want you to all tune in because I'm going to be talking about a new concept that I have come up with, and it involves you. Many of you are aware of the massive vocal coach reaction videos that are all over the internet, and of singing teachers, or so-called, waxing lyrical about other people's performances. And you know that I don't do those, certainly not at this stage. But I do masterclasses very often. So I've got an idea for how we might be able to do live masterclasses as a part of our live shows once a month, perhaps occasionally, and it sort of would boil down to a free lesson for those who are looking to participate. I'm going to talk more about that next week, so make sure you tune in and I'll give you all the details when we talk about that then. One final point, and this is just a reminder to let's remember to own and ground our comments, not only here on YouTube in the live chat section, and welcome to all of you who are live, it's great to see you all, but also in the Facebook community. Make sure you own and ground your comments. Remember, the person you are talking to is a fellow human being. Let's be kind to one another. In fact, this is not a reminder because I've seen anything overly negatory or negative in the comments. Just a reminder that, hey, this is a supportive, encouraging community of people, and we always want to, even when we're offering someone some critique, we want to do it in a manner that is encouraging, supportive, and builds people up, as opposed to seeking to tear people down. And we always do that here at Voice Essentials, and we want to keep it that way. Our special guest, Joanne Bozeman, has been teaching for quite some time, and I can hear her laughing. She is such an experienced teacher. I hope you're going to stick around and journey with us over the next half an hour or so as we talk about this ever so important topic, and so stick around because I think today's live hangout is going to be super interesting. I hope you'll stick around, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Sound check. Check 1, check 2.
Hello, Joanne.
Hello.
It's so good to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
And by virtue of full disclosure to our audience, we've kind of known each other for 3 or 4 years now, wouldn't it be?
Right.
We
saw each other in Stockholm.
In Stockholm, we shared a
ago.
lovely glass of wine in that amazing building.
Yes.
That was where they present the Nobel Prizes, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, the City Hall in
the
Stockholm.
City Hall. It was absolutely amazing space. And of course, we've had your husband on
Mm-hmm.
in the past, Kenneth, who has written the practical vocal acoustics books, and which everyone knows all about because they're fantastic. But you are, of your own right, you've been singing teaching for quite some time at Lawrence University.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about Lawrence and your experience there. And
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go back a little further than that, just because I started teaching when I was in college, when I was about 20, and I loved it. It was a great fit for me. When we moved here, my husband was first teaching at Lawrence, and I was teaching privately, and I became a mom the first time, and I was fascinated with pregnancy and childbirth. So, along with singing and teaching privately, I became a certified childbirth educator and a prenatal instructor for about 10 years. So, as we talk about these the perimenopause and menopausal changes, I sort of feel like I've circled back as a type of health educator, because that was a wonderful time for me, working with parents and all, and learning about the female body and all of the wonderful things that it's capable of. So anyway, that's part of my background as a teacher. But correct, I have taught at Lawrence University for 26 years. Just recently retired. But looking forward to other ways to continue teaching, and then working in this field of helping women during perimenopause and menopause and afterwards.
yeah, and it is that's. I mean, didn't know that about your previous experience around pregnancy, etc. Which, isn't it just fascinating how life has these turns and sort of, yeah, wonderful, coming back around to something that you're obviously very passionate about in an area that you're passionate about.
Right.
And one of the reasons why I invited you on to today's show, other than to see your lovely smiling face again, is because two other guests that we've had on the show previously, in Nancy Bose and Kate Fraser-Neely, and yourself are starting to, you're researching and starting to co-author a book around menopausal voice, and
correct.
And there's such, they've started it is a closed Facebook group, and I was privileged enough to be invited onto that. But the interest around this subject has been quite, it's possibly no surprise to you, but it has been a real interest to me to watch you three ladies, in a sense, bring into the light, I guess, and into the public consciousness something that it would appear has been happening behind private closed doors for so long, for so many women, and that is the journey that so many women are on through menopause. And so I think today's topic is going to be, well, it's going to be educational for me, and I think it's going to be so helpful for so many people who are watching our show today. I do just want to let people know that if you are watching the show live, incidentally, if you're watching this as a replay, hi, you are also welcome, and we'd love you to leave your questions in the comments section below of this video. But if you're watching this show live, Linda, as always, the ever faithful Linda, is taking questions. Now, I thought it might be helpful today. We might actually, I'm really keen for Joanne to be able to answer your specific questions around this topic of menopause, hormones, premenstrual voice syndrome, which is something that we might get a chance to talk about as well. I'm really keen for Joanne to answer your questions. So instead of me sort of holding the questions off until next week, which we'll do a Q&A next week as well, but we might try to answer your questions as we go. So if you have specific questions, please leave them in the live chat so that we can answer them as we go along today. So Joanne, what's up with hormones? I mean,
Okay.
You
I'm
ladies,
glad you asked that.
you have it so tough, really.
So hormones, the larynx is a target of sex or reproductive hormones. That's very obvious because when we get to be, with girls, maybe 10 to 13, the voice changes, not as dramatically as the boys do, and the boys go through their change approximately 12 to 14. And their voices change a lot more than women's do, or young women's do. Young women change a bit. It doesn't get as much press because it's not quite so dramatic, but we do go through a voice change as well.
Yeah.
So that's the first big step. And then we start our menstrual periods, and hormones affect us during that time as well, because they're constantly fluctuating. Progesterone and estrogen kind of do a up and down thing through the menstrual cycle. And then some women, and not all, I just want to stress something, that women experience these things so individually. And what I'm saying here are general concepts, and each person is different.
Yeah.
Some women, about a third of women, experience some issues with their voices in between 3 to 4 days before their period starts, and then into the menstrual period for a few days. And that's because there might be a bit of an imbalance of progesterone and estrogen at that time. They're actually relatively low, but they kind of communicate with each other. And if they're out of balance, the vocal folds might get puffy. They have, the lubrication is stickier and drier, and it just changes the way the vocal folds behave. And we also sometimes get crampy and a little puffy in our abdomens. It makes it less fun to sing. We may find that we lose our top range a little bit, or it lowers. We may feel that it's not as flexible as we're used to. And that's what has been called premenstrual vocal syndrome. And that was not discovered, but identified, because women have known it for centuries, by Dr. Joannes and his then wife, who was a gynecologist, who helped him do studies that showed, yes, the cellular changes at the larynx were identical to those at the cervix at the same time of the month. So that was a really important study that they did. But I like to tell people that in Europe, for a long time, women were excused from performing in the days right before their period. So this was not an uncommon thing.
Yeah, it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was referred to as a grace
days.
Grace days, wasn't it? Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I've not heard of that happening in the United States, but in Europe there is documentation that happened.
Yeah. They were more advanced in their thinking, perhaps.
I guess so, maybe more open about these things. But at any rate, so that is one area where we know hormones are affecting the quality of the vibration and also the sound that we produce. Some women are bothered by it quite a bit, and a lot of women are not. I personally, I don't remember having issues at that time of the month, but many do. And luckily, there was one study that showed that women were much more aware of how they sounded than people were listening to them. So that's not to diminish what people are experiencing, but it might be more of an obvious thing on the inside than it is on the outside. And that's assuming good technique, of course.
Yeah. It's certainly here in my studio. And I did read somewhere that the guesstimates around the statistics are about 1 in 3 women will experience a sense of change in their voice in accordance with their menstrual cycle. Not only just prior to menses, but also some women will experience some change during in the lead up immediately to ovulation.
Right.
Is that correct? Is that your thoughts?
Yes. Some people feel that's a really good time to sing. The vocal folds are supple. They're full enough. They're not too full. They're not swollen. And there's a lot of really liquidy lubrication at that time. In some cases, it can be too much. So people are clearing their throats. But typically that is thought to be a better time to sing than the 3 days before your period.
Yeah, right. Okay, very good. So what are women reporting, just before we start to get into things like menopause and what have you? How are women expressing these? What are the sensory things that they're experiencing? Are they experiencing a reduction in range, a reduction in stamina, pitch accuracy? Is there a pitch accuracy issue? What are women saying that they're experiencing at these times?
Well, you said three of them. I hope it's okay if I look at my crib notes,
Of
because I want to
course.
make sure I get these all in there, because there are several symptoms. As we lose estrogen, particularly, estrogen supports, and well, actually, yeah, the lubrication at the vocal folds. So when that goes away, things get to be kind of dry. It supports the musculature of the larynx. We have it. Well, another very important thing is that estrogen opposes natural androgens. Women actually do have some testosterone that we produce naturally, in smaller amounts. And normally it doesn't affect the voice, because estrogen sort of opposes it. It sort of covers it up. But when estrogen begins to go down, then we have these levels of androgen having an effect on the vocal folds, and it can thicken them a little bit. Some women find that their pitch goes down a bit. It may affect their ability to get their very top notes, because the vocal folds are a little thicker. There may be some neurological things going on. This is something I've seen references to this, but I haven't seen exact studies on this. But I think I would love to see research being done on whether or not changes of hormone level affect neurological response. So some women say their voice feels slow and stodgy, and it's not quick. It's harder to do agility tasks as well.
Right.
So these are some things: registration irregularities, cracking, raspy qualities, and that's because the makeup of the vocal folds is changing often frequently as hormone levels go up and down in perimenopause, because the cycles are irregular. Yeah, so it's kind of the moving target for a lot of women.
And have women reported that they, as they age, not, and I'm talking now from the first onset of their menstrual cycle through to perimenopausal, do women communicate that there's that their experience of voice changes over the 2 or 3 decades of that time? Does there, or what you experience in your late teens will be almost certainly what you're going to experience right through till your 50s?
No, our voice is constantly changing as we grow. Cartilages begin to ossify, so they're not as stretchy. Our respiratory function changes. I mean, really, we're aging from our 20s or so on. I think I'm safe to say that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the 18-year-old voice is not the 45-year-old voice, but then a 45-year-old voice is not a 70-year-old voice either. So we had mentioned earlier that perimenopause and menopause are addressed in studies and books about voice, but it's sometimes is treated like, I would say all the time, is treated more like a footnote to the aging process. Aging is really, really important to understand, but it's this period of time, and I should probably just mention for people that don't know, perimenopause is the time leading up to menopause. Perimenopause can usually start in the 40s. And that process of the menstrual cycle, fertility winding down over time can take 2 to 10 years. So it's quite a long time. And then menopause is the point in time when we have not had a menstrual period for 12 months. And then from then on, you are menopausal. So that's quite a long time. And when we start that process is probably going to make a difference. If women start their menopause later, then they have a bit of an older body versus somebody who starts it a little bit earlier. So does that kind of answer your question too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the human body for both men and women is such a complex piece of equipment.
Yes, it is.
And you know, it is. Women have this extra sort of layer of complexity to deal with that we men just simply don't need to. I do want to deep dive into the menopause area, and I'm going to have less questions when we get to this space because it's an area I don't know a lot about, and so. But we'll get to that in a second. Before we do, though, I'm wondering whether have there been any, for those women who are experiencing issues with their voice in connection to their menstrual cycle, what is what is recommended to alleviate or mitigate some of those issues?
Time. And the hormones have to rebalance as the cycle goes on. And once that happens, then the voice is going to settle down. It kind of depends on the person. I usually, if you can, I would say if the voice is feeling premenstrually sort of stodgy, if you don't have to sing a lot, maybe don't. It doesn't mean you have to back off completely, but if you don't have to use the voice a lot, take it easy, perhaps. We don't want to be in a position where we're pushing or making not wise choices with the voice. Warm it up. I think that it's a great time to do semi-occluded vocal tract exercises to take the pressure off the vocal folds. Keep the voice going. It may not be the best time. Well, let me roll that back just a little bit. One thing that happens at that time in some women is not only is there some swelling of the vocal folds, there can be little tiny microvarices or tiny little capillaries that are exposed on the vocal folds. So they're a little congested. They are slightly more risky in that if there's extra pressure, you might have a little bleed into the vocal folds, and we want to avoid that. So I guess I would say as a voice teacher, I wouldn't, if I knew my student were at that phase of her cycle, I wouldn't want to really work out her top notes at that time. Yeah. or push the voice in any way, just kind of keep things moderate just because of that possible risk. And we don't know if that's happening without actually having a vocal exam of the larynx to see. I'm going to add one more thing. You probably talked to your people about this, but using certain pain medications, NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And I think it's because of this slightly higher risk of a vocal fold hemorrhage. This is a particularly important time to not use them, if at all possible.
Yeah, ibuprofen and aspirin are the Australian version of those medications that we try to steer singers, regardless of menstrual cycle.
Right, absolutely.
Prior to singing, we try to steer singers away due to that heightened risk of vocal fold hemorrhage. Mm-hmm. Definitely, I'm so pleased you raised this issue of the capillaries. In fact, what made me cognizant of this area was way back about very early in my teaching career. So this, I think, was nearly 20 years ago. I had a student who, not every month, but on occasion, she would have these micro hemorrhages, and it was completely attached to her menstrual cycle. And she was a gigging singer, and so she actually had to write in her own grace days, if you will. She couldn't book gigs during that period of time. And it was, and back then I didn't have the knowledge, and I still, to be honest with you, there's not a lot that can be done to alleviate it outside of, and I'd love you to speak to this if you're able to. The reading that I have done has suggested that things such as the oral contraceptive can alleviate the symptoms of this somewhat, that is always a discussion, I guess, to have with your medical doctor, and not your singing teacher per se. Do you know of anything else in that regard that can be helpful to singers that are experiencing it at an extreme level?
Well, you mentioned one thing that needs to be brought up, and that is that there are some studies that, as you said, show that it seems to mitigate the swings of the hormones and causes more vocal stability. Not everybody can take them or want to.
No.
But it is, I think, particularly for, as you said, someone who's making a living might want to consider that with their doctor.
Yeah.
I think rest is important, and I think that eating well is important. I think that I read some suggestions of avoiding salt because it tends to make the body retain fluid. I don't honestly know if that's going to affect the vocal folds.
Interesting.
But it might help, the lower areas of the body from feeling so bloaty.
Well, I guess a low salt diet is not a bad idea in general. So.
Right. You might avoid the pickles, and prepared foods have a lot of salt in them. I haven't seen any real miracles.
Yeah.
Some people find that they can make some changes in their diet and they feel better, but it's so hormonally driven and individualized. It's I don't know. Again, this is not my main area of expertise.
No.
But,
and as we were discussing pre-show, here we are in the 21st century. We're 20 years in now to the 21st century, and this area, and now I do want to sort of get into your area of real specialty with menopause voice, but there's just so much we don't know about this area, and it's fascinating to me that more studies haven't been conducted in this space. And it is exciting that ones like yourself, Nancy and Kate, are starting to really delve into this space, because I think it's so important. I have students who, of their own volition, female students, who will come in and volunteer. It's that time of the month, my voice is not feeling great, and we proceed accordingly. It's interesting, as a teacher, because I get to know a student's voice, I often I never volunteer this suggestion, but I can often hear the change in the voice, just by virtue of reduction of range or what have you. So I'm excited to see what you ladies come up with around this space. Let's talk directly to your specific area of interest, which is menopausal voice. Tell me more. Teach me what is
okay.
Going
First,
on.
Can I give a plug on the book?
Yes, please.
Sure. Okay. We are writing it together, which is a unique experience, and the book is called "Singing Through Change: Women's Voices in Midlife, Menopause, and Beyond." And it's a complex journey for the women that we've interviewed. We have talked to almost 60 women. We're not calling it a formal study because we haven't followed sort of study protocols, but we're calling them interviews with a variety of women who sing of all genres. We have shower singers, choral singers, and you said in Australia you call it PCM.
Right? This is I use the term popular culture musics.
Okay.
CCM
in the US.
is actually the given vernacular here in Australia also. It's just that I personally have my own issues with that term.
Got it. Okay. Well, so many different kinds of singers. You have to at least be in perimenopause for us to have had the talk with you. So we are turning these interviews into stories. Now, you said something about studies. These are difficult studies to do, frankly. It's really hard to take a woman's complex life and her own complex hormonal situation and take out all the little important details and end up with averages, right? Because averages don't tell a story. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a speech language pathologist, and she said, yeah, we really need to study this, but what's our control going to be? A woman who's never menstruated, or never gone through menopause. So we don't have a control,
Yeah.
and we can't use men as our control. So,
and not
anyway.
to mention the ethics surrounding the whole subject.
Right, exactly. I have a friend who's doing a study on, this is kind of bizarre, but the thyroid muscle of female rats that they put into menopause. And they're studying, so that means the lack of estrogen on the rat muscle. So there are studies going on. It'll take a while to derive some good from that.
Wow.
But now I got sidetracked. I'm sorry.
That's all
your
right.
question was?
That's super interesting though.
I think so.
Yeah.
Oh, here's something, and this speaks to your point about not knowing so much about it. I recently gave a talk at the vocal acoustics seminar that just took place at New England Conservatory, and I had a group of wonderful voice teachers there. I wasn't my group, but the group there I was invited to talk to was about 40 passionate pedagogues, voice teachers. And I threw out the question. I said, how many of you talked in your pedagogy courses or your choral education courses about adolescent voice change? And there was just a few hands went up, and I said, well, how many of you have studied aging voice? And a few hands went up, and I said, how many of you were introduced to the idea of voice change in perimenopause and menopause?
No hands.
Nobody. So, and this is a group of, and they seemed very interested in having this information. So,
I think there will be singing teachers all over the globe who will just be waiting with bated breath to get their hands on what you ladies are able to, present us with, because it is a field that is desolate of information. There's just so little. Yeah.
I have to stress that, again, women go through this so differently. Some women breeze through. We've interviewed people, and there have been people on our Facebook page that say, I've never been singing better. I feel terrific. One woman we interviewed is a very busy session singer, and she says, my voice has never felt more robust. I can't believe I'm in my mid-50s and I'm still going strong. And we can think of a lot of examples of all kinds of singers who sing well all along. But there's this other group that haven't been able to tell their stories, and that's who we're talking to. And I think what women who are really experiencing changes in their voices need to understand, number one, that it's normal. Number two, that they need to be able to adapt to these changes and not try to sing with the voice that they once had, because it's a changing instrument, and old ideas sometimes don't work with that changing instrument. And that's okay. Another important thing to talk about is that, and I felt this way too, my voice changed relatively quickly. I had another, in addition to perimenopause, and I know that some of the symptoms were perimenopause, I had a mild vocal fold paresis, or weakness, neurological weakness that came along with it. So it made it particularly challenging. But short of that, when your voice begins to act very strange, and I felt like somebody put a new larynx in my throat, you begin to question your ability as a singer. And
in your case as a teacher, I would dare say.
Oh yeah, it was kind of devastating to think, I'm trying to make this note on this particular pitch come out, and I'm not sure it's going to be in tune. Or I can't do fast onsets anymore. I can't make my vocal folds come together quickly right now. That might have been the paresis part, but that it doesn't really matter. There are other symptoms that other women are talking about. My voice feels rough. I can't get to my high notes like I used to. I'm having difficulty moving through my registers. My middle voice feels very unstable. These kinds of things. And it's very difficult to sing pretty much anything if your middle voice feels wonky.
Is there, and I'm just going to inject a question so I don't forget to ask it, but don't don't feel that you need to answer this right now. You might want to answer it later. But is there any comorbidity of things like reflux and those sorts of issues taking place as a result of the menopause, but are also then accentuating the voice change?
Yes. Now, we've run across a little bit of evidence that reflux can increase during perimenopause and menopause. In fact, there are a study or two that say that reflux is more common in that premenstrual time as well. So there may be a similar hormonal thing that's going on. Progesterone causes the esophageal sphincter to relax, and that might have something to do it. Anyway, so yes, reflux.
Interesting.
It seems to be complained about a good bit. Let's see, comorbidities. Well, the neurological thing is fascinating to me, and we kind of wonder about that. We don't have solid evidence of that, but a very astute singing voice specialist that I know in the U.S. said that in her clinic, they seem to see this mild paresis occur more often during this period of time, this perimenopausal, menopausal time.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Again, this is a clinical observation.
It's all anecdotal.
Right. Anecdotal, but those are important.
Absolutely. It's the anecdotal stuff that leads us to ask the question, to go, right. There's something here. There's something here.
Right. And then in the stories that we have been gathering, we found that it's not tidy sometimes. We will say, oh, this person actually ended up in a situation where they developed a lesion on their vocal folds. Now, I give an example. A woman who was kind of forcing herself to sing first soprano, carry the first soprano section by herself. And she had a fight with her daughter, and she had raised her voice, and then she went to the choir rehearsal and sang soprano when she first soprano when she shouldn't have, and kind of, carried the day.
Yeah.
And after that, she had a problem with her voice. And we're going, is that perimenopause? Well, maybe the voice was in a situation where it was compromised from that as well. So it's a little bit of this perfect storm situation. It's hard sometimes to suss out. And we are not clinicians. We're not looking at these voices. We're hearing stories. And so we can't answer those questions, but we observe them.
So I guess your approach, just for people who are interested, you're taking a very ethnographical approach to the book. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And letting the narrative of people's stories, lead us in certain directions. Yeah, interesting.
Right. And then we're giving the information about the physiologic stuff along with the stories.
That's a really clever way of approaching it. Fascinating. I'm
very impressed with many women, ones who have had some struggles, how they've persevered. And I also need to just say that the rougher part of the story is not the end of the story. That over time, let me dial that back. It seems like in the group of women that we have talked to, again, this is a limited population, that there seems to be, and these are women who have not had other voice health problems, but just sort of mere voice change from the hormonal shift, that some women really struggle more during perimenopause, and then menopause happens, the voice kind of settles down.
Yeah.
And then some women seem to get through the perimenopausal part pretty well, and then menopause happens, i.e. the hormones are basically shut down at that point, and then they struggle with the voice for a couple of years, and then things get better.
Is it crude to think of it to the point of even error? And I'd be very happy. I'm not suggesting that this is the case. I'm just offering a thought bubble. In so many respects, young men go through significant voice change, and we hear that mutational voice of teenage boys as
Right.
they age into adult voice, and so they experience a significant impact on their psyche and those sorts of things at those times.
Mm-hmm.
Is it? It's almost like this is that sort of era of voice for women, but it happens in their 50s and during menopause. That significant. It's almost like the significant change for women is happening during this menopausal period.
Right. Some people will call this the second puberty,
The second
or
puberty.
menopause in general is the second puberty.
Yeah.
And we sometimes call it the second voice change.
Yeah. Yes. Wow. It's if there wasn't enough to deal with.
Right. There are other things going on in lives as well during this time. There's stress and trauma in some cases, very sad cases,
Yes.
and job changes, teenagers acting up or moving out,
Yes.
care for elderly parents. And then in our bodies, sometimes we have health challenges that pop up
Yeah.
during those years. And that's why I said it's very hard to just suss out the voice change part of it. We have to look at the whole story.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions that have come in here. One from Linda. In fact, I'm going to give a question to Linda. Linda takes all of our questions, but she's actually asking a really intuitive question, which we would expect. Her background is as a GP, a general practitioner, medical doctor. Have there been many studies on HRT and the female voice in menopause? She goes on to write, there is continuous HRT, no fluctuation, does not replicate normal cycle, and there is combined, that is, that mimics normal cycles. Would you advise vocally, is it a better option to go on continuous HRT? I guess, Linda, we'd have to be careful that we don't advise anything because we're not medical doctors. But is there much study into HRT, hormone replacement therapy, besides the oral contraception that we were talking about earlier for just the menstrual cycle in
Right.
general?
There are some studies. I think, again, I'm not a medical practitioner by any means. I think typically with HT, that's sometimes being called now, HT for menopausal women, is not the same as the birth control pill.
Yeah.
I think what we call just steady state.
Yeah, okay.
Just get on a combination of estrogen and progesterone, typically, if there's a uterus there. Progesterone is to protect the lining of the uterus
Right.
at the time. So if you don't have a uterus, just estrogen can be taken. But
Right.
I feel a little bit out of my depth here, but I will say this, that some studies, and a lot of these HT or HRT studies talk about speaking voice and changes in speaking voice versus singing voice. There is clinical opinion, practitioner opinion on this. It's a very individualized situation because of possible health risks that a woman might have.
Yeah.
And as we know, it's not being given like it used to be.
No.
Until the big nurses study and the concerns about that. But I would, if that is a consideration for women to take HT, I would, there are more recent readings of that study and interpretations of that study and newer studies to look at.
It's a conversation to have with your gynecologist, I would
It would have to
think.
be, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've got another question here too, just before we continue. Tollhouse Queen has asked, do you think a change in diet is helpful for those going through menopause?
I'm not sure that I personally have an opinion on that, but I do know that women do make those kind of changes. I have a friend that became a vegan and felt like it helped her a great deal. Again, there are no studies really showing this, but I think if we just have a good baseline diet and exercise, those are all good things during this time.
Yeah.
Taking, I would say, this is a little bit off the subject there, but exercise is important. We
Yeah.
lose at that phase of life. We sometimes we're losing muscle tone all over our bodies as we get older.
Yeah.
So losing our core muscles in our bodies in general, and if we lose that core abdominal tone, it can affect how our singing goes. So it's a lot of different things going on. Diet can be part of it, absolutely. I just don't have a particular recommendation for a particular diet.
No, and I guess, YouTube is the last place that anyone should be, taking hard and fast information from.
Right.
And so we'll always stop short of giving categoric, do this X, Y, Z, in regards to matters of medical health.
Right.
But I wonder. There's probably two more things I want to talk about today, if we can.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because I know how late it is in Wisconsin right now. We're heading up to 10 to midnight. So thank you very much for your generous time. The thyroid and the implications of the thyroid, not only during menopause, but what is your understanding about the thyroid and its involvement in the whole process of the endocrine system and how it's impacting?
As we've written this book, we've come across really interesting things. As we talk to the women, they'll say, this happened to me, and we'll go, oh, is this part of the whole menopausal transition, or is it something separate? But what we have learned is that thyroid changes are more common as we age, and that sort of overlaps with that menopausal time. Some women that we've talked to went through early menopause, and that means age 37, 38. That's about 12 to 14 years earlier than the average age, which is about, menopause is about, in the US it's 51, 52 is when we attain menopause. But so that's quite a bit earlier. Thyroid problems can cause early menopause, and the symptoms of a certain type of thyroid change are very, very similar to perimenopausal symptoms in general and vocal symptoms. So I would say if a woman begins to wonder if she's going into perimenopause in her late 30s or anytime in her 30s, it might be something else going on. It may not be natural menopause.
Yeah.
And so in that case, we advise, and a voice teacher can help with this too if they notice some changes, to get a full thyroid panel, not just testing for one type of thyroid factor. Sorry, there's my lack of medical knowledge, but doing a whole thyroid panel. And if there is a thyroid problem, either hypo or hyper, you can sometimes avoid that early menopause situation from occurring with proper treatment.
Yeah. And for those interested, if you want to learn more about the hyper or hypo thyroidism, there I do have a video on this very subject that you can check out on my channel. But it is, and when we spoke before, we spoke about this before the show went to air today. Is there an observable thing going on with the thyroid, for example, during pregnancy? Do we see that? I've certainly, anecdotally, I've actually not only had students, but a couple of friends that have come out the other end of pregnancy with thyroid issues, and that it's had been indicated to them that it was the pregnancy that led to that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, what's your understanding of that?
Yeah, I got to beg off on that one.
Yeah, okay.
Out of my depth, I haven't heard of that, but then again, I haven't been really researching that area of life right recently. So,
and Okay, so one more thing that I just, because especially given your history around pregnancy and not only with your own children, but also in your area of practice before you were a singing teacher, what is your advice around singing during pregnancy and post pregnancy? What are you generally advising women to do in that regard due to the changes that are going on for them hormonally?
Right, hormonally and physically as well. There are several things going on. The hormones through pregnancy, both estrogen and progesterone are rising a lot. They're, to support the pregnancy. There's also another hormone called relaxin, and relaxin starts to be secreted to actually get the body ready for delivery. A couple things happen there. Relaxin and progesterone can cause the esophageal sphincter to relax, and then we have the pressure of the baby as it's growing up into the abdomen. So something like 40 to 85% of pregnant women have problems with reflux. And as a singer, that's particularly important. So watching out for that and taking care of getting the head of your bed up, watching the dietary things, being pretty proactive with the reflux issues. Unfortunately, I don't know if pregnant women can take some of the acid reducers like Prilosec or Zantac. It may have to be just antacid tablets that have calcium or something in them. But as far as the hormonal situation on the voice, it depends on the woman. Some women find their voice gets kind of rich and full, particularly in the midpoint of pregnancy. And then later on in the pregnancy, the baby is so high, depending on your build, it gets more difficult to breathe low in the body, and it's more difficult to oxygenate. So if you're going to be performing, you may need to breathe more just to support the phrase. Let's see, what else? There's, it's also very, very individualistic. Some women can sing all the way through their pregnancies. I was reading about some pretty famous opera singers saying they have managed to do that pretty well. And then some, they get very puffy in the middle of the pregnancy and the voice isn't working as well. Now, I can speak for myself. With my last child, I sang a Messiah at 7 months and it went well. And then about the last 6 weeks of the pregnancy, I couldn't sing above a G.
Wow.
So G at the top of the staff. And that was probably because at that point, the vocal folds got pretty congested because of the hormonal influences. I think that those are the basics on the pregnancy, but again, it's very different. Some women feel like their voices change after they've had a baby and they've gained in richness. It's possible.
Have you had anyone express to you that their voice has pregnancy has had a negative effect on their voice post pregnancy?
I've never had anybody tell me that personally. Have you?
No. I was just interested to.
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
There are a couple things because you asked about postpartum. The abdominal. I should go back to this. So support is different when you're pregnant because not just because the baby is high, but your abdominal muscles are dividing.
Yes.
And they're getting stretched.
Yes.
Your posture is different because your weight is thrown off. Everything shifts around a lot. So singing while you're pregnant, you're singing with a different body.
Yeah. So
it's a very good idea to, if you can, to keep working with a teacher, get advice, have somebody listen to you and watch you. But some sway back is going to happen to a degree just because of where the baby is, the fetus is. Afterwards, the body needs to recover. I think some wise advice I read, I think from Dr. Sadeloff, that felt like, you can sing in those first 6 weeks. You should be singing a little bit, humming to your baby, singing to your baby, but softly, singing in the shower, maybe starting out with semi-occluded vocal tract stuff just to get things back online. But those muscles have to come back into place where they were, right? Knit back together. And I have one little additional thing on that I want to add. And just to get your strength back, you're sleep deprived and, taking care of the infant. He said it's 6 weeks is probably a good time to start ramping up your practice seriously. And then perhaps, if you can, avoid performing till about 3 months. So giving yourself 2 months or so to get back in shape.
I'm a little chuffed to hear that, because in fact, over the years, my advice, and I'm always very careful to deliver it as friendly advice as opposed to an instruction, because pregnant women are not sick, they're simply going through a very natural process. But my advice has always been to pregnant women if they can, to perhaps consider not booking professional shows in the third trimester. Not necessarily because they definitely won't be able to, but because there's a likelihood that things won't be where they want them to be. And so they could find themselves in a professionally compromised situation. And then I've always then advised that the first 3 months after pregnancy is probably a good period of time to consider not placing the voice under professional vocal loads, performance vocal loads. So I'm quite chuffed to hear that Saddleoff's suggesting the same, that I'm suggesting the same thing as Saddleoff. That's a good thing. Maybe I read it in one of his books and that's where I've got the information from. That is very, very possible.
And that also depends on the mode of delivery too, because cesarean section delivery has different implications on recovery.
Yes.
I wanted to talk a little bit about something called diastasis recti, which is the six-pack muscles.
Yes.
Those undergo quite a bit of, they open up to accommodate. And most of the time, those will come back together again. But in some women, they stay divided.
Yes.
That's a very special situation where if a woman realizes that, she needs to have special physical therapy in order to help those muscles conjoin again and come close back together again.
Yes.
And there are certain exercises that are not good for that. Your typical crunches and core exercises will actually exacerbate that situation. So if a woman realizes those recti muscles are not coming back together again, they should talk to their gynecologist. I'm not their gynecologist, their OB, sorry. Their practitioner, to find a physical therapist that can help them do it, regain the strength again and the proper location of those muscles.
One of our closest family friends, who will remain nameless to not sort of out her, not that I'm outing anything, but she had twins, and the twins went full term, and they were actually, I don't think maybe they didn't go full term, but they were big twins, and she experienced that very thing, and it has been quite a challenge for her to rehabilitate the abdominal wall. So can certainly be.
It's not just the abdominal wall; it has implications on the pelvic floor too. So that's why having a PT who has that gynecological experience is preferable.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow, I mean, we are scratching the surface here. I know we are. Ira Road has just asked, and this will be the last question we go to today, I think. But how do menopause changes go on to relate to presbylarynges, vocal fold? I think bowing. That's what that word, and atrophy risks in women as they age into their 60s and 70s. So maybe we can answer that question, but also then talk about postmenopausal experience. What is, let's leave everyone with some hope, shall we, Joanne?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I have wanted to say is that, things can get rough. There can be a stormy time, and then things can calm down, and we learn to sing with this voice that's possibly feeling a little bit different, and not to give up, but to keep singing. I think this is super important to, even if the voice feels weird, to keep singing, keep those nerves active, keep the muscles active, keep the core, the breathing system going. That's super, super important. It's much harder to pick it up again later, though it's not impossible.
Use it or
Okay,
lose it. Yeah.
the question, so as we get older, certainly the age factor starts coming in more, and the structure of the vocal folds change. They're less elastic. We lose collagen. We lose other factors in the layers of the vocal folds. They get thinner. The presbylarynx just means old larynx, right? The vocal fold bowing is actually more common in men than in women, as far as I know. The thyroid muscle then atrophies somewhat, and then we get this sort of spindle-like thing in the vocal folds. I think that's actually more common in men than women. It's probably not unheard of, but women's voices in general tend to go down with age, and men's voices start to come up a little bit. If we get old enough, we joke and we say by the time we're 90, we're talking on the same pitch. Oversimplification. But so did I hit on the question enough?
I think so. I think it's they're talking to they are talking to the atrophy of the vocal fold, and I would dare say the elasticity of the folds and the ligament, etc., into the 60s and 70s. It's sort of a question to aging voice, I guess, more so than menopausal, but it's taking into account menopause being, in a sense, that gateway, if you like, to aging voice for women.
Right. And like I said, if a woman's average age of menopause is 51, very old, is it?
No, it's not by today's standards.
Right. What is old?
Midlife. Yeah.
But I found a lovely quote by a German voice researcher. His last name is Habermann, and he said that there are many more old people than old voices. That's encouraging. And we do know that the studies show very clearly that singers' voices age better than non-singers. So keep singing.
It's use it or lose it, isn't it? Really is.
Right.
Yeah.
There was one more thing I was going to mention about aging. Oh, it's gone.
That's all right.
It's gone.
You have been so generous with your time today. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, that's there's so much. There's so
much, and perhaps I don't know whether this would be ever possible to have all three of you ladies on at some point when the book comes out to talk us through some of the wonderful stories I'm sure that you're collecting in regards to this, which I think is just such an intuitive way to go about addressing this concern, is to tell the stories and I guess in part to communicate to women of similar age that they're not alone, which seems to be certainly on the Facebook, the closed group, I think it's Kate who shares that there was nothing when she was going through it, there was nothing available for her, and she sort of suffered in silence, so to speak. And I think the starting of us understanding this has to be a telling of the stories, to say, hey, this is happening in a very widespread kind of way, and if the only generality about it is the fact that there are a lot of women experiencing it, then that's enough for these stories to be told. So I think that's fantastic.
And choral directors need to know this information.
Yeah.
Voice teachers. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's been wonderful to have you on the show, and I've learnt a lot today. I don't think I went red once. I don't think you did. I
thought you handled things really well.
I think I did all right for an Aussie bloke. So it has been really wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for staying up so late. I mean, it's way past anyone's bedtime. And especially given that you really, you're no longer on a faculty, so to speak. You don't have any, boxes to tick. You've really just done this out of the goodness of your own heart. So thank you very much for doing that. Well, and it's very much appreciated.
I've had a good time, and I appreciate your asking me to participate, and maybe we'll see you again.
I would love that. There we go, everyone. It is so good to have had Joanne on the show. Isn't she lovely? I mean, and so forthcoming with her knowledge and her understanding. And I'll be letting you know when that book becomes available, because I know so many of you here as a part of the Voice Essentials community will really gain something out of the reading of this text once it becomes available. And I'm serious, it would be really good if we could get Nancy, Kate, and Joanne onto the show together. Wouldn't that be a blast? It might be too much to handle. I don't know. We'll find out.